Okay.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to a very interesting and awesome discussion tonight. My name is Sherry, and I'm here interviewing my friend David. And we are connected through our Course in Miracles group, and we are hoping to share some enlightening information to help you return to nature. And tonight's topic is the topic of clocks. And tonight, when David explains, he is going to help you kind of return your clocks to match nature's rhythms and teach you a new way of understanding time and keeping time, and kind of explain how we've been indoctrinated and trained to measure our time and be in time in a certain way. So really quickly, I'll just let you know, like I said, David and I are part of a Course in Miracles group. And we both went to our first Course in Miracles retreat in Salt Spring Island, Canada, which is in BC. And I'm here right now. So it's really cool that we're connecting and kind of firing back up those nascent energies of our own journey with our teacher and friend Tina Spalding, who's Trance Channel, and she's the one who brought me into the know on the Course in Miracles, and it's like totally changed my life. So I'm super grateful for that text and for every single person that has become my friend through that group, including David. And we just have like the most amazing conversations about life and truth and consciousness expansion, love, forgiveness, peace, like all the good stuff in life. So that's kind of the energy that we share. That's our friendship. Welcome, David. It's so good to have you here. And yeah, that was
Great to
kind of
be
like a
here.
little intro. How did that go?
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to let everybody know that if they haven't studied the Course in Miracles yet, that's not a prerequisite to this little discussion we're having here, because most of this discussion is definitely within the illusion of the world and time. The Course in Miracles is about helping us get from this illusion that we're in which time is actually artificial. Most people don't realize that, but it's an artificial construct that we seem to be in right now. And so I just want to read this miracle principle number 15 that talks about time. It's in the very first chapter. It says, each day, we're going to be talking about days today. Each day should be devoted to miracles. The purpose of time is to enable you to learn how to use time constructively. It is thus a teaching device and a means to an end. Time will cease when it is no longer useful in facilitating learning. So tonight is about time. So I'm teaching you some things that I've found are really interesting about time that I've learned. And this is actually just the first of, probably 3 or maybe even 4, or even 5 or 6, I don't know, of fairly short sessions, because I wanted to break it up, not only for the viewers, but for us. And, it's just easier to look at one thing at a time. So this tonight is going to be about clocks. And if we feel like we have time to extend it into a discussion about daylight saving time, I'll get into that as well. So,
Okay, great. Thank you.
yeah. And this is the third time I've gone through this process. The first time was in Gainesville at my friend Alicia's 13 Moons Healing Arts Center. Gainesville, Florida, that is. And so that went well. And then I did it again, did this class again in Salt Springs, Florida.
So many salt springs and salt spring out there.
Right. As opposed to Salt Spring Island, British Columbia, where Sherry is right now. um, and so I want to start out the last session that we do. I'll probably bring it all the things together that we've learned throughout the sessions we're going to have. And so I want to start out by just telling you about how I became so interested in time. And I'm just observing that I have my big slug, a snail behind me, slowing down time.
Mhm.
Different beings have a completely different relationship with time. And I know myself to be an immortal spiritual being, as you do.
Mhm.
And I'm sure many of the people watching this will understand that we are all, no matter who you are, we're all immortal spiritual beings. Like what's his name, Teilhard de Chardin, a French priest, Catholic priest. He said that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes, little play on words, but so profound. Did not get that.
Yeah. And so, as such, beyond time, we're living all kinds of lifetimes all in the same instant. And our life is happening just like that
Yeah,
in a
I've
flash.
had the visualization of the spiral basically, and that time isn't linear. And there's like obviously multiple timelines, but it's also like this kind of a spiral framework. And I think
Mhm.
it's really neat to imagine that all we have is right now, and that whatever happened in the past is gone, and whatever's coming in the future isn't happening yet, and it's just
Doesn't
now
neither,
anyway.
yeah, neither one of them exists
Hmm.
in actuality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we actually have well, let me start out by just saying in this lifetime, my mother frequently would say different things about time. Like she would say, time is the thing that keeps everything from happening all at once. And I would have to think about that. How does that work?
Interesting.
There's little mind benders like that she would give me.
Hmm.
And she also, I remember her telling me several times, to God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. So that used to also be a way of having me, it was a mental exercise to think about time. But if we are looking at lives as linear, and that I had a past life, one of my past lives that I remember,
Hmm.
which is happening right now, I guess. But it's hard for us to think about that. But anyway, in a past life, I was a Swiss watchmaker,
Hmm.
and people would come into my shop and they would want to chit chat about all kinds of things, events that were happening in the village where I lived, or um, events that were coming up, or things that had happened, or but all I was interested in talking about was time. And then later on in that memory, uh, I went to the village square and they were having a festival. And I saw a juggler at the festival. So that then became, I became obsessed with juggling and couldn't get that out of my mind now. So, and that's a real rhythmic thing. So it's also about time related, but it seemed so magical to me that somebody could almost bend time and space in this amazing way. And so then that event in that lifetime made me decide to become a juggler in this lifetime. So I was a professional juggler for about 20 years, and mostly in Atlanta, Georgia.
That's
Anyway,
really amazing that you pulled that through from another lifetime and actually did it in this lifetime in a professional way.
yeah, well, we actually, what brings us back to Earth is our dreams, our unfulfilled dreams. And so if we can eventually detach ourselves from this dream and detach ourselves from the attractions of this earth, then we won't have to come back. So that's where I think I am. I feel like this is my last my
Yes,
last hurrah, and I'm making the most of it and really enjoying it. And
I love that. I feel that way too. That this is my last Earth incarnation as a human, but we'll see.
yeah,
Guess we won't know till we know.
yeah, right.
So where do you want to start with this? How do you want to?
Okay, let me share my screen
Sure.
here, and let's start with the clock.
Great.
Um, this is I drew this earlier today. This is a typical clock. I started to say TikTok. um, and of course, it starts. Well, does it start? It starts right here. But is this midnight or noon?
We don't know.
Well, it's really both. It acts as both, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it could be either one, depending on where you're at in the world and all that. But so yeah, what I'm gonna try to, there's a way that I can expand this. Oh, that's all right. Um, let me see if okay. So it actually goes, the hour hand actually goes around twice in a day, right?
Yeah.
So I put the symbol of the sun as the noon time, and this symbol that kind of looks like a moon, a crescent moon, I put that to symbolize midnight. So both the 12 o'clock hour is both representing noon and midnight. But the day is actually supposed to start with midnight and then go around once and reach noon and then go around again and reach midnight again. And that's one day, right? So it's
Yeah.
24 hours divided into AM and PM. Well, okay, that's where we're at now. Let's talk about how we got here to this point. And what is AM and PM? It used to be that the the day would start when the sun rose and go till the sun set. And before noon was called antemeridium, and afternoon was postmeridium. So that's literally what they mean, before noon and afternoon.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so it wasn't talking about the nighttime. That was a completely different thing. What they had for nighttime was watches. And it started out with the first, with 3 watches during the night.
And
So,
watches, you don't mean watch like you wear on a wrist. You mean like a purse, like a century or someone.
right, exactly, like somebody staying awake and having the responsibility for watching and, making sure no thieves came or no wild animals came or whatnot. And so then you'd get sleepy and you'd wake somebody else up and it would be their turn to have the second watch and so forth. So then at some point, they divided the day into 12 hours.
Hmm.
So it started out with the first hour and the second hour all the way to the 12th hour. They still had AM and PM, and they still had the 3 watches at night, although later they created 4 watches. I guess it was too long.
Yeah, that is a long time, especially in the middle of the night.
So, so it changed from being 4 hours long to being 3 hours long. Well, and these aren't the hours like we have because the sun throughout the year changes depending on what your latitude is. Well, the hours of the day could be longer or shorter.
Oh yeah, like up here, our sun is setting at like 9:02 p.m.
Yeah, right. And when does it rise?
Pretty early actually. Here, I'll look real quick. That's a
Are
good
you
question.
on daylight savings time there as well?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's probably about 7 o'clock in the morning then.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So normally it would be from 8 to 8.
Oh, actually, no, David, I'm sorry, I'm
No,
mistaken. Sunrise is 5:18 a.m.
5:18.
Sun,
Wow.
yeah, sunset is 9:03 p.m. Sunrise is 5:18 a.m. So it's
Okay.
quite interesting being here because, yeah, I'm East Coast time person normally. So it's
Uh-huh.
like it's so light outside until it's 9 o'clock at night. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I'm this beautiful window I'm sleeping next to. And I'm like, oh, the sun is up. And I grab my phone. I'm like, oh, Jesus, it's not even 6 a.m. yet. So,
Yeah, and you could be in an area of the Pacific time zone where the sun isn't straight up at noon. I mean, there's only one line, one longitudinal line where it's the sun is at its zenith at noon within the time zone.
okay.
So there's going to be some variation, but the daylight savings time moves that by a whole hour. Mm. So that's another discussion we'll get into.
Okay.
um,
I don't want to take us off track. I know we're trying to keep these like short little bites.
yeah. All right. So let me see what I have here. There's now we've gone back, we've gone to this clock where AM is everything from midnight to noon, and then everything from noon to midnight is PM. And that's where we came from here. So now instead of the the 12 hours starting at sunrise. Oh, and I just want to say, let me show you this. This is a sundial.
Hmm.
So this shows you how the shadow, which ends up being on the other side, right? The shadow is on the opposite side. So the time moved around the sundial from it went counterclockwise because the shadow would come from this direction. And anyway, so that's where the 12 hours came from. So now, instead of being like that, now it's like this.
Hmm.
So how far we've come, right?
I know it's fascinating, but it's like, wow, a lot went into this, the development and the change.
Yeah. Okay, so at some point they decided to make the the time of the day start at midnight so that there were 12 hours from midnight to noon and another 12 hours from noon to midnight. And so that gave us 24 hours. And now a lot of clocks have 24 hours. They still start at the top. So I did a different clock here. Uh, the normal Zulu time starts with 0 up here. Yeah, it starts with 0. I put 0 at the bottom for a reason I'll explain in a moment. But it starts with 0. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around to 12 here at the bottom. And then 13 through 24 is back at the top. So the reason I did this the opposite way is because the day starts at midnight. And so if you do it the way I did it here, then the sun, the hour hand, which represented by this arrow here, would always be pointing roughly to where the sun is. So you can actually follow the sun all the way around in a day
Oh,
from,
I see what you mean.
uh-huh,
Okay, so wherever the arrow's pointing, that's the hour where the sun is like it's tracing the sun across the sky, across the movement that
exactly,
we think really the sun isn't moving, we are, but how we see it.
exactly. So over here at 6 o'clock in the morning, on average, that's when the sun is going to rise,
Mhm.
and then noon will be 12 o'clock, and then the sun will set at 18, which is 6 p.m. And you could actually put the hours in PM over here if you wanted to, if you're more accustomed to thinking in terms of AM and PM.
Well, this is familiar for me, military time. We would say
Oh, right.
1800
Okay.
hours is 6 o'clock. And you mentioned Zulu time earlier. Whenever I was deployed, all the reports that we did, we had to do it in Zulu time, which was common across all the commands, global.
Right.
So
Yep.
I guess I
So,
knew more about this than I thought I did.
yeah, right. And did you have any analog clocks like this that had the 24 hours with the hour hand?
Everything was basically digital. We just had to know the
Okay.
conversion from local to Zulu. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah.
What about watches? Your watches were digital as well, or?
Yeah. Oh, and we had cool watches. I was in an airborne unit, so we had watches that would do like, elevation and speed when you're jumping out of the airplane and stuff like that. So
Oh, okay, right.
yeah, it was
Yeah,
but I think some of those watches did have that. I just had the one that was all um digital. but I
Mhm.
remember some very, very complex and cool watches that some of my peers had. So,
Yeah. And so, what would you do? Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about daylight savings time. What would you do with this clock to keep the sun, relatively straight up at noon and yet still be able to tell the time? Because when daylight savings time rolls around, the sun doesn't change its position in the sky. It's the Earth is still rotating around its axis in 24 hours. The only thing that changed was the number that we attached to that time when the sun is at straight, at noon or midnight or whatever. So I came up with what I think is a clever way to deal with that. And that is just to shift the numbers by 1 hour.
okay.
I
Yeah.
show it down here where at 2 o'clock in the morning, this used to be where the 2 o'clock position was here, and now it shifts to 3 o'clock. And so you would still see, you could put this type of a clock on the south wall of your home or office or whatnot if you're in the northern hemisphere, and put it on your north wall if you're in the southern hemisphere, and it would point relatively close to where the sun is, depending on where you are in the time zone. You could even shift it um, even more so that straight up is at noon, is always at right at noon, so that it really is pointing to wherever the sun is. And then whether it's nighttime or it's a cloudy day or whatever, you would always know, or if you're inside, whatever, you would always know where the sun is in the sky.
I love that. I think it's a great idea because it actually connects us to nature as opposed to technology and control and all those things.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So that's pretty much it for the clock, my clock idea, other than later on when we get into the moon cycle and things like that. I'll add some more ideas to this, but I also wanted to show you some other sundials. This is an
Wow.
ancient, I believe this is an ancient Greek sundial and ancient Roman sundial that looks to be showing at about, looks like somewhere around 10 in the 10 o'clock. Well, what we would consider 10 o'clock minus 6 hours would be about the 4 o'clock hour.
And so it goes from right to left. Is that how,
Um,
like it looks like for me the shadow is well, I kind of see two
it,
shadows. So if you could just explain how, like which direction it moves.
it goes from,
Oh,
can you see,
clockwise.
can you see my cursor here?
I can, yes.
So because the sun is, well, you know what? It depends on which way this is facing.
Yeah.
Um,
But basically when you look at it, there's no question. Like where that shadow is literally pointing, it's inside of an hour piece of pie, right?
yeah,
So you know.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know whether this is pointing north or south. So I don't know if it's in
Oh,
the
right.
morning or afternoon. So
Mm.
um, I'd have to get into those those details to know. But here's another one that's up on a column.
So when did the change occur? When did it stop being like this? And is it like a long over time change, or was it all of a sudden we're becoming quote unquote modern?
Yeah, it was, over centuries that it went from from the AM PM thing and the three watches uh to the 12 hours. Gradually as people got sundials, because it started in ancient Sumeria, went to Egypt and throughout Mesopotamia. And so it's not like you can say there was one particular time or year
Okay.
when it started. It just spread as the idea spread. And then at some point the Romans switched it from three watches to four watches. And then also the Romans, and you could look and see what years it was back in the time of, I know that this between the Old Testament and the New Testament was when the Romans switched from three watches to four watches at night.
Interesting.
And as to when they changed to the day starting at midnight, um, I'm not real sure. Haven't looked at that. But I would imagine it was around the same time as some of the calendar changes, like the Julian calendar
Mhm.
in the time of Julius Caesar, somewhere around there, plus or minus 100 years, probably, or 200
That would
years.
make perfect sense. Yeah.
Mhm. And so then we have the water clocks was a way of keeping track of time for instance, at night. So when they developed these water clocks, which probably started in China, because they have them there.
I've never seen this before.
Yeah, the hole is a certain size so that it takes 12 hours for the water to drain from this uh, container into the one below.
That is so cool. Oh my goodness. Like a giant egg timer.
Yeah, right. And so there would be lines inside this bowl down here at the bottom where you could tell what time, what relatively what time it was based on how many lines up the water was.
That's so neat. I'd like to get one of those. I bet it would be really relaxing to hear that water throughout the night if you could hear it.
Yeah, right. And you could do it in the day too, if you
Hmm.
wanted to. So you could keep it going all day and all night. So let's talk about, first let me show you. Um, this was back in 1883 that they created standard time across the United States. Before that, people in a town would just set their clocks so that noon was straight up. So you could go just a few minutes away and the time would be different because people would have their clocks set straight up. And so one train station might have a completely different time than another train station. And it was incredibly confusing for people. And so they decided to create a standard railway time. And this was the railroad companies, right? This was not the US government or anything.
Oh, interesting. So the railway companies are the ones that came up with this uh procedure or program.
Yeah, yeah, they uh, printed this map here. And you can see in the lower corner here, where in the lower right-hand corner, where the Eastern time says railways operated by Eastern time, Central, Mountain, and Pacific time. Each have a different pattern to the line. So even though these these clocks here representing the different time zones, those are based on the latitude. I'm sorry, the longitude. So Eastern time is showing at 75 degrees latitude. I'm sorry, longitude, 75 longitude, 90 longitude, 105 longitude, and 130 longitude. So those are all 15 degrees apart from each other. But
Okay.
that's not where the time zones are. That's just generally the middle of the time zone.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's not establishing time zones, but it is showing you that as you travel during your train ride, the time is going to change.
Right, exactly. And so you can see the symbols over here in this Eastern time zone area are Eastern time zone, but those are individual railroad stations. This was when they had a lot more railroad stations than they do now. And then in the middle here, you see a lot of central time zone railways. The bulk of the railways are in the central time zone. And then, but you still see the mountain time zones and the Pacific time zones over here. So that's how that worked. So from 1883 on, people would have, um, they would pretty much, a lot of people would set all their clocks according to the railroad clocks.
Interesting. And that's not that long ago, 1883.
No, right. About 150 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's only 140 years ago.
Look, I was like, yep, whatever
I
you
don't
say.
know.
I'm not doing that math, David. You can do it. Okay.
Me either. It's 160 years ago,
Okay.
161 years ago. Okay. Anyway. So then, oh, here's a reminder of which direction you go. You spring forward an hour and fall back an hour. You spring forward an hour in the springtime. You fall
And
back
lose
an
an
hour.
hour. Right?
You
Everybody always
fall.
goes, no, I'm gonna lose an hour of sleep tonight. We have to change the clock.
Yeah. So, yeah, in the spring, you have a 23-hour day, and in the fall, you have a 25-hour day.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So, let's see here. So then, between 1883 and 1966, actually between early 1900s, I can't remember exactly when it was, but different people in different states started doing daylight savings time. And it was causing problems with different people doing daylight savings time, and some were and some weren't. And so the railroad industry was now having a problem with keeping track of all that. And so because the railroads were an interstate um, transportation thing, the federal government had charge of the railroads. the standards and everything used across the country. And so they the federal government came up with a standard time in 1966, which is in my lifetime.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so let's take a look at daylight savings time. Let's look at the laws. So this is going to be interesting because it's going to lead later on into a discussion that we're going to have at some point. We're going to do an income tax freedom interview, right?
That's right. I forgot to mention in the beginning that this is really about our freedom. We did talk about the Course in Miracles and freeing our minds from our programming and indoctrinations through just understanding the truth. And this is so great because this is very detailed, and I love the historical reflection on when these things happened. And I don't know, we've never really learned this history, well, unless you were more in an agricultural setting or maybe training. I think perhaps there are certain subjects where you would look at this and how it developed over time. But ultimately, the reason why you and I are talking and offering these discussions is because we want to be free, and we want to free our minds. We want to live in a way that is more aligned with nature and less aligned with indoctrination and programming to the best of our ability. So
Mm,
this is great. This is empowering information for us. So thank you.
mm. Yeah, you're so welcome. And so we go to this is the United States Code on this is the official US code on the US House of Representatives website.
Okay.
And down here there's 54 different titles, they call them, volumes basically.
Oh, I
And
remember Title 10. Everything was Title 10 for me.
oh, okay, yeah, Armed Forces, Title 10, yeah. And so down here in Title 15 is Commerce and Trade. So this is where the interstate commerce, excuse me, is regulated by the federal government. And this chapter 6, weights and measures and standard time, and subchapter 9, standard time. This is where we find the laws about standard time and daylight saving time. Now, here in the law, they don't call it daylight saving time. They call it, let's see here. Here's section 261, title 15, section 261. This is where the different zones are set. It's divided into 9 different zones. That's coming from Puerto Rico all the way around to Hawaii.
9 time zones.
9 time zones, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's more than I thought that there was, but that my limited view is just from New York to LA. So,
Right. Um, Excuse me, I actually have a little bit of a nosebleed.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting timing, isn't it?
Right. So I'm going to hold my nose here for a
All
minute
right.
to stop it. But then so this is 260A, and here's where it says during the period commencing at 2 o'clock. I'll let you read this so I'm not sounding funny.
Okay, sure. The whole paragraph or just what's
Yeah.
highlighted? Okay. During the period commencing at 2 o'clock ante-meridian AM on the second Sunday of March of each year and ending at 2 o'clock ante-meridian on the first Sunday of November of each year, the standard time of each zone established by sections 261 to 264 of this title, as modified by section 265 of this title, shall be advanced 1 hour, and such time as so advanced shall, for the purposes of such sections 261 to 264, as so modified, be the standard time of such zone during such period. However, 1. Any state that lies entirely within one time zone may by law exempt itself from the provisions of this subsection, providing for the advancement of time, but only if that law provides that the entire state, including all political subdivisions thereof, shall observe the standard time otherwise applicable during that period. And 2, any
That's
state,
okay.
sorry,
You
okay,
you can stop there because
okay,
two is just about if a state is in two time zones, what happens then.
okay, yeah.
But
Yeah, like Georgia, do they have, or Alabama? I feel like there's a shift, or Kentucky, something in there. I remember driving through there and it's like the time changed twice somehow.
oh, okay.
Yeah, like it changed time and then it went back, but because there was like a weird, I don't know.
Yeah, the time zones in some states go through the middle of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it's talking about there. But basically the state can just exempt itself from the daylight savings time.
Like Arizona. That's the only one that I know of. Are there more?
Arizona and Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh. And there used to be parts of Indiana as well. I don't know if they still exempted themselves, but some counties in Indiana used to be exempted from the time change.
Interesting.
Anyway, so um going back to this clock here. This would be a way that well, one way that you could kind of rebel against the time change if you didn't want to participate in going to work earlier so that you could have more days of more hours of sunlight after work, which is the basic idea, which some people like and some people don't. Some companies like, some don't. They said that theaters didn't like it because people had more daylight hours and they didn't want to go to the movie theaters and sit in the dark
Huh,
much.
makes sense.
And then there were other companies that like golfing and other things that really liked it because they got more business. Um, so you could just set different hours for your business
Hmm.
and just continue going by the
So in other words, like when you say set different hours, where in standard time your hours are 9 to 5, but on daylight savings you could be 8 to 4, or whatever the, you know.
yeah, you'd be, let's see. Um, yeah, let's say you start at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if let's say your banker's hours, let's go banker's hours are 9 to 5, which is 17. So if the bank wanted to stay open in the same hours of the daylight, then they would switch their hours to 10 to 18 during daylight savings time.
Okay, right.
Which I would encourage anyone to do.
Yeah.
You just have to go to you just have to go by um, from the second Sunday of March of each year to the first Sunday of November is when your summer hours would be.
Yeah. And then if you cite the law, then it's like you did your research and
Right. So I wanted to show you also, this will also come into play later on during the income tax discussion, and who knows where else it could come up. But this is the law that says who the law applies to. So section 262, this is Title 15, duty to observe standard time zones. Within the respective zones created under the authority of sections 261 to 264 of this title, the standard time of the zone shall, insofar as practicable, as determined by the Secretary of Transportation, govern the movement of all common carriers engaged in interstate or foreign commerce.
hmm.
So it's not everybody.
Yeah.
And then in all statutes, orders, rules, and regulations relating to the time of performance of any act by any officer or department of the United States, whether in the legislative, executive, or judicial branches of the government, or relating to the time within which any rights shall accrue or determine, or within which any act, that's an act of government, shall or shall not be performed by any person subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, it shall be understood and intended that the time shall, insofar as practicable, as determined by the Secretary of Transportation, to be the United States Standard Time of the zone within which the act is to be performed. Now, I just wanted to show that this law, this the standard time zones only applies to common carriers of interstate commerce.
hmm
And or foreign, if it's like trains or such going between the US and Canada, for example. And all United States government of all different types and any people that are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States government. That would be the US island territories and the District of Columbia. That's who this law applies to.
So
And
it's
as
not
evidence,
everyone.
it's not everyone. As evidence of that, I
Well, when
turned
it says, can we go back for a second, where it
yeah.
says to the jurisdiction of the United States, it doesn't actually say government. So it could be interpreted as jurisdiction of the land itself, like every, so how do you explain that?
Well, jurisdiction is a matter of legality. So the United States government only has jurisdiction over the District of Columbia and any federal territories and US possessions, federal areas, buildings, forts. Um, that's per the US Constitution,
Okay.
where it
Thank you for
says,
explaining that. I'm just saying, like, reading
yeah,
it, someone may think like, well, it says United States and I live in the United States, so why wouldn't I, So
right,
thanks for bringing that up because I think that's a really important thing to know that, it's just the Washington, D.C. and these territories.
right, exactly. There's a US Supreme Court decision called Hooven and Allison Company versus EVOT. And it says that there are three senses of the term United States when used in the law. It can mean basically the federal government. It can be the United States that only includes the US federal territories, or it can be the 50 states that are bound together by the Constitution. So the 50 states,
Mhm.
the 50 states, it's also called the several states. It's called the several states of the Union. It's called the um, continental United States and Alaska and Hawaii, which anyway. So in this case, because it's talking about jurisdiction of the United States, it's talking about the United States government.
Okay.
It's not talking about the geographical area. Even if it was talking about the geographical United States, we wouldn't know from this whether it was the US federal territories and the District of Columbia or whether it was the 50 states. But they've conveniently told us, as they do almost always in the laws, they tell you what the definition of state is here.
I love it.
As used in this act, the term state includes the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Guam, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, or any possession of the United States. Notice what it doesn't include here.
All the other states?
Yeah, it doesn't include the 50 states.
That's insane. Wow.
So they knew that they didn't really have the jurisdiction over the states to make them decide how they would treat time, how they would set their time within their state.
Hmm.
But they worded it in such a way to make everyone think that they had complete jurisdiction over the whole country and could set the time across the whole country.
Right.
And just everybody, they fooled everybody, and so everybody just was like, oh, okay, well, we'll play along.
Yeah, we have no choice. It's like, not that there was email back then, but however the courier brought the letter, it's like, okay, all work stopped on that day because they had to freaking figure out how to make adjustments. And I don't know. I can imagine when an email comes down from higher headquarters, like, hey, there's a new thing we have to do. We have to stop everything. It's top priority. And then we have to
Right,
respond by 5 p.m. tomorrow to make sure that we're all updated and complying with it.
right, exactly. So what they relied on was the common interpretation of the word state here in the United States to mean all 50 states.
Yep.
Yeah. And so even back there in which notice, well, okay, so when used in this act, yeah, notice that when we go back here to 260A and it says any state may by law exempt itself from the provisions of this subsection, that's only the only those states here
Oh, right. Okay. Even
applies.
though they're identified, they do have the option of saying we want to be exempt.
Right. So the way the law is reading, it's really only those states that can exempt themselves. However, because all these states have actually created laws, like we'll look at the state of Florida here. Um, Florida has this in the very beginning of their laws, Title I of Florida statutes, Chapter 1, definitions, and 1.01 is definitions, and 1.02 is legal time. 1.025 is the Sunshine Protection Act. Let's look at those. Can you read that okay?
I can see it. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. So in all laws, statutes, orders, rules, and regulations of this state relating to the time of performance of any act by any officer or department of the state, whether in the legislative, executive, or judicial branches. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Uh-huh. So they
Or
just
related,
they just copied and paste.
or relating to the time within which any rights shall accrue or determine, or within which any act shall or shall not be performed by any person subject to the jurisdiction of this state, it shall be understood and intended that the said time shall be the United States standard time of the zone within which the act is to be performed or the right shall accrue or determine. So this is where the law actually is that sets the time to standard time in the state of Florida.
Right.
It wasn't this law up here.
Yep. So this at the state level, they created something and
Yeah.
and it has to be enforced at that point,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say here in Florida, we are subject to the jurisdiction of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So since the state is setting the law and they're following United States Standard Time of the zone, because the zones do apply to the whole country. They're not forcing them on you, on the states, but they do apply to the whole, all the way from Puerto Rico to Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. And in
And
a way,
possibly,
I mean, the time because of where the sun is and the United States is such a huge land mass in addition to all the territories and everything else, it's like, it's not like, for instance, right now it's what, 8:19 p.m. here and
mhm,
you're 11:19 p.m.
right.
Like it to me, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but I think the whole business of changing to standard time and all of that gets a little bit of an overreach. But anyway, that's just me, and I'm still just learning and a student to what you're teaching here. So please keep going.
No, definitely. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And so the state of Florida could have exempted themselves from the daylight savings time. Actually, yeah, that this is the place they would have had to do that. They didn't actually have to, but because they're going by United States time zone, they could have set some other way of expressing it. Instead of going by the United States Standard Time Zone, they could have said they could have followed the pattern of the coordinated universal time. Um, that of the second zone would be 5 hours less. That's the Eastern Standard Time. So they could have just said the standard time of Florida shall be coordinated universal time retarded by 5 hours. That's it. They could have just said that. And then we wouldn't have the daylight saving time. And now, not only do they have to do something like that, but they have to repeal this law, Sunshine Protection Act. Did you know, have you ever heard about the fact that the US Senate has actually passed a bill to make daylight savings time permanent?
I did not know that, no.
So that we're always off, we're always off kilter. Midnight would always be when the sun is off, and noon would always be where the sun is off by an hour.
Now, do you think that I don't know, I don't want to get into too much like controversy here, but it seems like meddling of the federal government in our individual lives
Yeah,
is
it
not
is.
always in our best interest. And actually we started this talk with the little description that we want to recalibrate our clocks, like our biological clocks, our rhythms to
Right,
match nature's rhythms. So it's like
right,
the government is encouraging us to live in an unnatural way by observing
right.
time in this constraint or this limited view.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Senate has passed that bill, and they're just waiting for that bill is going to, if they pass it, has to go through the House of Representatives, and then if they pass it, then it has to be signed by the president.
And so that
If
means we won't be changing the clocks anymore. It's just the one time zone all year round.
it- which would be some advantage, except for the fact that it's not standard time. It's not, um, it would be daylight savings time all year round,
Yeah, right, right.
which to me just doesn't make any sense at all. If you're gonna change the time so that it's the same all year round, why not stay with standard time all year round,
Yeah.
right?
And is this just Florida or is this
No, that's in the US
this
Senate. They
for the
passed
whole
that
for the
bill.
country?
Yeah, for the whole country.
Wow.
Well, as much as they can, it would be for the railroad companies and any other interstate transportation common carriers of transportation, would be for domestic airline flights and things like that.
And it's all going to be linked in with like the real ID and you know,
Right.
it's
Right.
okay. I don't have to travel anymore because I'm going to learn how to use interdimensional portals and by location,
There we go.
you
Yeah.
know,
Now we're talking.
whatever.
Yeah. Get into real time travel.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so Florida has passed this Sunshine Protection Act. Isn't that a weird title? We're going to
It's interesting.
protect
It's
sunshine.
evocative, that's for sure. Protect it.
There,
Because
there are
everything's in
heroes.
danger. Everything's in danger of just going to complete shit. So we got to protect the sun.
Right. So if the United States Congress amends 15 USC section 260A, that's that one we were looking at before,
Yep.
right here, about daylight saving time, to authorize states to observe daylight saving time year round. It is the intent of the legislature, the Florida legislature, that daylight saving time shall be the year-round standard time of the entire state and all its political subdivisions. So I say that we repeal that act
Do
and that
people even
we,
know this is happening? Like how does this how do the people find out about this if they don't watch TV like me?
find out about what?
That there's this thing called the Sunshine Protection Act and that I could speak out against it.
Oh, you would have had to follow all the different bills happening in 2018. It was the 99th bill that got passed, shown right down here. Um, I think that's what that means.
Hmm.
Well, no, it might not be because it just says 2000. Yeah, I think it is because some of these others are older chapters, 1915. Anyway, yeah, I think it was probably no, because that U.S. Senate bill was just a couple years ago, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, you'd have to look at the state legislature and what they're doing up there in
But
Tallahassee.
who does that? Like this is going to be something where most people have no idea. And then one day the governor is going to announce like, hey, guess what's happening?
Well, right. It's a good question. I guess people that don't watch TV a lot and or at all, and are curious people, maybe somebody watching this will take it on themselves to get involved. And
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
we'll
now
be,
that I know about it, now that it's like in my conscious mind,
Mhm.
like, okay, well, what can be done? Because it does feel like when a change like this happens, it's basically just going to be passed. And although we have elected officials who are supposed to represent us, how do they know my opinion? How do they gauge their electorate or their constituency to determine is everybody a yay or a nay? Like, do they have a meeting? Is it like we need to send this out in some kind of a communication? I don't know.
This is why I think that state government is so much more important than federal government. Is because there's a lot fewer people for each state representative, and so each of us have more say, more say in our representatives and what they're doing, and the state has all the power here in the state of Florida. The state legislature has all the power in Florida. It's
Yeah,
not the federal government. The federal
right.
government has every chance they've gotten overstepped their boundaries, and the states have have flipped their rights, and they're kind of like always bowing down. Oh yes, federal government, yeah, we'll just follow along with whatever you're doing because we don't want to take the time and trouble to think about these things, and you've planned it all out, and yes, we'll just do as you say.
And it turns out the federal government wasn't even applying this to the 50 states. So that's another thing that's
Exactly.
really interesting. They went ahead and
Yeah,
said, "Oh, we're going to adopt it even though we don't have to. We're going to
right,
do it anyway."
right. Even though it only really applied to the federal government itself and to the interstate commerce carriers, common carriers. Yeah. So I wrote this sample bill that I'm now, after this discussion we just had, I'm going to have to modify it, but all this beginning part still applies. An act to end daylight saving time in Florida. Whereas the federal twice yearly 1 hour time change disrupts the work and rest schedules of Florida citizens. And whereas this twice yearly time change significantly increases fatal traffic accidents up to 30% on the day of commencing daylight saving time. And whereas daylight saving time leads to a short-term rise in workplace injuries, 5.7% after the spring daylight saving time shift, as employees sleep 40 minutes less on average. And whereas daylight saving time leads to elevated rates of acute myocardial infarction, up by about 3.9%. And whereas the intent of daylight saving time was to decrease electricity demand, yet daylight saving time has instead been shown to increase such demand, especially increasing air conditioner usage. And whereas daylight saving time puts the sun at its zenith between 12:52 p.m. in Pensacola and 1:23 p.m. in West Palm Beach, yet standard time balances the morning light hours and afternoon light hours, putting the sun at its zenith close to high noon throughout Florida. And whereas the citizens, businesses, and institutions of Florida are fully capable of adjusting their own meeting times and open hours by consensual agreement rather than be forced to artificially do so twice a year by federal law. Therefore, Florida Statute 1.02 is hereby amended, blah, blah, blah. So I
I love
amended it
it. This is
in a
awesome, David.
yeah, it took a lot of research to
I can imagine. Yeah.
to figure all
All
that
those
out.
statistics, that's one thing nobody ever talks about is the impact on the humans that are having to comply without question. So that's really beautiful it's like compassionate. It brings in the human element to these rules, laws, statutes that just seem to be so antiseptic. It's like it has nothing to do with humans. It's just do it because this is how it is. I mean, most people I
Right,
don't think even question it.
right. Exactly. So I sent this bill to my US representative, I'm sorry, my state representative when I did this, I think it was around last August. Never heard back from them. But you know, maybe I'll run for state legislature.
Yeah, why not?
There's a whole lot more research that I would want to do before I got into that,
I
but
know, I know. I mean, as soon as I say that, it's like, or not,
yeah, yeah.
Because
Plus,
I think the system is gonna change dramatically. And I could see wanting to participate more and be involved by running, but I almost feel like the majority of people on the outside of the government are going to be the ones putting the pressure on to make changes or just kind of pulling away, So I would rather be in that crowd that's kind of like, you guys do whatever you're going to do. We're going to do what we're going to do over here.
yeah, exactly. That's right. I would much prefer instead of running for a state office, which is just gonna throw me into a swamp, a mired mess. Um, I would rather teach people about something I've learned about called sociocracy, which we can do this from the ground up, organizing ourselves, and it's the full title of it is the Sociocratic Circle Organization Method, and we can network the whole world really
Hmm.
um, with this way of coming to consensual agreements with each other.
And I attended a class where you talked about sociocracy. I had never heard of it before, other than like having a discussion with you previously. And I do believe that that's the way humanity is heading, because obviously this government business, it's just not scratching the itch when it comes to
Right.
leadership and implementing, you know, agreed upon changes, and it's almost as if who cares about the people, because everybody's
Yeah.
too busy. We just got to get these bills passed. And anyway,
Right.
so I
Right.
can't wait for that discussion, the sociocracy talk, and exposing people to that and helping them see that there's already like a template, and we just have
Yeah.
to practice it and you see its value.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll have that one in there too. We've got a lot of discussions to come up.
Got some talks coming.
Yeah. So I'm so thankful for you for being my partner in doing these discussions. And yeah,
Absolutely. Well, do you feel like this is a good place to stop with this topic,
it's
or
a wrap. Yeah,
how
it's
do
a
you,
wrap.
okay. It's a wrap. All right. Okay. Any
Ready?
closing comments or anything, or let me know.
I'll let you do the closing comments because you're the one listening to all this stuff.
Well, I'm really fascinated. So my background serving in the military for 20 years, I never thought to question anything about using well, I mean, I guess it made sense because we're dealing in a global environment and we're using Zulu time and the Julian calendar you mentioned. I was in the communications field and we did a lot with using the Julian time or Julian calendar. It's all kind of like a distant memory now, to be honest with you. But I knew we pulled it out and we had to figure stuff out and when we wrote our reports and things. But for just average people who are used to, okay, what time is it? And oh, a couple times a year we change the clock. It's just assumed that you have to, and it's like way over your head, a decision is made. And I think like at the end of the day, it's disempowering. And the more that we learn that we have been told something that isn't really um, based in any type of authority, and we just comply, I think that's where people need to start looking at like being super present every part of the day, all their lives. Like, where am I unnecessarily complying with some guidance that didn't come from me?
Right.
And that's what I'm learning. And of course, all the details of this, like looking at the law and the way you laid it out, it doesn't apply to anywhere other than the DC and all the territories, but yet the states then take it on. It's like, God, that's fascinating how the law is written. And I can't wait to talk more about that as we go through all these topic areas, because I know that that's where this is headed, is to continue to teach us. We're very compliant, very agreeable, and we need not be. We need to be more
Right.
empowered and more connected with nature.
Yeah.
Nature is the guide for us, and
Yeah.
not the suit with the tie, that's the Republican or the Democrat. It's like, okay, that's all very interesting, and I'm sure you mean well. But so
Right. Exactly.
yeah, I
Yeah.
took some notes while you were talking. Even like what I was going to come back to is the idea of, like, again, my military experience when we would pull watch or pull duty or whatever they would call it, this idea of someone being on watch, and then we wore watches. So how all those terminology origins, they come together in this topic. And I think it's fascinating because as we learn in the Course in Miracles and all the channeled material, that words are symbols of symbols, and a lot of our language is kind of spell casting anyway. And it's just
Right.
funny how there's just no questioning it. We're just like, oh, I put my watch on, I know what time I have to change my watch when the time changes. So yeah, it's cool. It's like poetic for me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I
thank
want to,
you.
yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you. I want to close this out by playing this little song
Oh
here.
yeah, that's right. Okay, let's do it.
One day you'll look to see I've gone But tomorrow may rain, so I'll follow the sun.
Yeah.
Someday you'll know I was the one, but tomorrow may rain, so I'll follow the sun. Another time has come, and so my love I must go. And though I lose a friend, in the end you will know. Oh, one day you'll find that I have gone, but tomorrow may rain, so I'll follow the sun.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again, David. This was great. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't even hear that it was still playing.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you. All right.
So
Bye-bye.
looking forward to our next discussion. We'll see everybody next time. I'm going to end the recording.
All right.